Now, this gun might look terrifying to you, but there's a really easy way to make it safer. Just gotta put a number on it. Thank you, 60 Minutes, for teaching me how to make a gun safe. Hello and welcome to A Bit Too Much to Think. So, recently, 60 Minutes came out with a segment on so-called ghost guns, and it's full of BS. Now, YouTuber Reno May had a really good video breaking down most of it. I highly recommend you watch it if you want more context behind the whole segment, or just watch the whole 60 Minutes segment to get more context as well. But the whole thing made me think about how little people understand about the serial numbers on a firearm. Now, if you don't know what a ghost gun is, it's essentially a scary-sounding term for a gun that doesn't have a serial number on it. Now, this is a very important point because it's kind of what this whole video is based on. Just because a gun has a number on it does not magically make it safer. And this video explains why. Now, this video deals with a lot of arguments from both sides of the aisle. There's some laws in place by Republicans, some laws in place by Democrats, some that shouldn't be in place at all, and some that are completely missing. And there are reasons for both of these. I'm only focusing on the facts as they are now for the first about 2/3 of the video, mostly just giving a history of what serial numbers are and what the law is behind serial numbers. Now, if you do not like a law that is in place, or if you feel like one is missing, I would highly recommend that you petition your local House representative or your senators and try to get that passed or try to amend the law that's already in place. So to kick off the history of serial numbers, they began in U.S. law in 1934 with the passing of the National Firearms Act, or the NFA as it's commonly referred to. It was designed to put limits on the firearms that gangsters of the time, like Al Capone, could get, and give more ammo, pun intended, to prosecutors arresting criminals with these firearms. In this legislation, they defined firearm as only being essentially sawed-off shotguns and rifles that are small enough to be concealable, not including pistols or revolvers, and any machine gun, which is defined as a gun that shoots more than one bullet with one single pull of the trigger. In Section 8 of this law, they require that every firearm, remember it's under that smaller definition, be marked by the manufacturer and/or importer. And they also say it's illegal to alter or destroy the serial number, which is worth mentioning here. The whole point of a serial number here is to know who it's sold to, so that in the event a crime is committed with a firearm, the serial number can be used to trace it back to its owner. That's why in the very next section, the law states that the dealers have to keep records of the transactions with the firearms. So the next expansion of serial numbers happens in 1968 with the Gun Control Act. The goal of this one was to, quote, better control the interstate traffic in firearms. This act did a number of things, including expanding on the definition of a firearm to what we think of it today, just anything that fires a bullet. But the rest of the things this bill does is kind of outside of the scope of this video. The rest of that bill doesn't really concern serial numbers. What really matters, though, is that this act requires every firearm under the new definition, so just anything that fires a bullet, to be serialized by the importer or manufacturer. It's also still illegal to remove the serial number from the firearm. This act also created the Form 4473, which links the gun owner to the gun and the serial number, and the manufacturer, importer, and dealer of a firearm still have to keep records of what gun was sold to who and when, which is basically the info of the Form 4473. It's a broad generalization, but for this purpose, that's all you really need to know about it. The next important aspect to discuss here is the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986. You see, this act states that the government cannot have a national firearms database. The exact wording, quote, no such rule or regulation prescribed after the date of the enactment of the Firearm Owners Protection Act may require that records required to be maintained under this chapter or any portion of the contents of such records be recorded at or transferred to a facility owned, managed, or controlled by the United States or any state or any political subdivision thereof, nor that any system of registration of firearms, firearm owners, or firearms transactions or dispositions be established. What's important here is that this act actually amended the Gun Control Act of 1968. So when it says that you can't make anything that require that records be maintained under this chapter or any portion of the contents of such records. What it's really meaning is you can't have a searchable database of serial numbers with their people. Basically, you can't keep the Form 4473 in just a large database. This also means that those records that the firearm dealers and manufacturers have to keep cannot just be given to the government. Instead, this act states earlier in the bill that the government has to talk to the manufacturer and dealer of the firearm to get the Form 4473, which has the serial number of the firearm and the name of the individual. Now, the reason the act cites for this is to protect against illegal searches and seizures under the Fourth Amendment. Again, that's just what the act says. I'm not trying to support either side for this part. I'm not saying whether this is good or bad. But that's basically where we are today. All guns have to be serialized unless you manufacture it yourself. It's illegal to mess with the serialization, and you must sign a form connecting your serial number with you when you purchase a gun. Gun stores keep records of serial numbers and purchasers. The government can get that record if a crime is committed with that firearm. So this is where the facts end and my opinions begin. There's two important parts about so-called ghost guns. First, 60 Minutes acts like ghost guns are some brand new danger because they don't have serial numbers. They act like without a serial number, the government does not know who owns it and where it is. But that's already the case with serialized firearms. The government doesn't really know now who owns what firearms, even with numbers on it. Under the Firearm Owners Protection Act, they cannot have a whole database of it. So they don't have a collection of knowledge to know exactly where these guns are. Every single gun basically fits this definition of a ghost gun, because the government doesn't know who owns it and doesn't know where it is. Now, the second important thing is the only difference between a serialized gun and a ghost gun is 30 minutes with a metal file. Under $10, a quick trip to Home Depot, and you have yourself a ghost gun and about 5 felonies. That's a hell of an afternoon. Now, I'm not saying you should do that. You absolutely should not do that. Like I said, that's like 5 felonies. You should not commit crimes. Do not take the serial number off of your gun. However, the only difference is 30 minutes with a metal file. It's not as though the serial number is some like tracking chip that the government has. The serial number is only used if a gun is used in a crime and then found. Then they're able to maybe track the serial number to the original owner. That's it. That's all a serial number does. So the last important part of this is that they go after gun kits that you can buy online. The thing is, these kits are not like skirting some legal boundary. It's 100% legal to manufacture your own firearm. It's also already illegal to manufacture your own firearm if you cannot legally buy a firearm, and it's probably illegal to buy parts to manufacture your own firearm if you're in that category as well. I don't know about that second one, but I know the first one is illegal. Those kits are also well within the legal boundary because they're considered to be 80% or less of a firearm, which is where the legal boundary is, where you have to consider it transfer of a firearm or not. If you want to bring the threshold down to 50% and just make the kit harder to manufacture, fine, it'll just take longer to make. Eventually, you can keep bringing down the threshold until you're serializing literally just steel and wood. The point of this video is serial numbers are not magic. They don't change how safe a gun is. Whether or not a gun is bought from a dealer or made from a kit does not change the fact that the gun requires someone to pull the trigger. Really, what I'm trying to do is fight back against the fear-mongering that 60 Minutes creates. They act like this ghost gun concept is a brand new problem, when before 1968, every single gun except for that really small definition of firearms from the National Firearms Act of 1934 was under this umbrella of a ghost gun. Every gun manufactured before that time is under this umbrella of a ghost gun because they are not serialized. So if your grandpa has a gun that he bought in the 1950s, it's probably not serialized. Really, the whole 60 Minutes segment is just fear-mongering to get more attention. That's all it is. It's absolute BS. Like I said, serial numbers don't change how safe a gun is. The fact that now there's more guns without serial numbers really doesn't change anything at all. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of A Bit Too Much to Think. If you liked it, leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. If you have more thoughts on it, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you very much for listening, and have a wonderful day.